panel, we want to talk about jurisdictional issues and what's important when people are considering where to set up their company, their foundation, their organization. So we're going to talk about a number of different things. It's probably worth saying, for those who don't know, most of you probably do, but Gibraltar has really tried to be a leader in this space, and in many ways has already succeeded, in my view. And it's doing it looking at where regulation currently falls short in terms of the crypto sector, and how can you introduce appropriate regulation that doesn't kill innovation and actually encourages and supports it. So Gibraltar already has a DLT provider regime, which is enabling people to apply to be licensed to be exchanges, custodians, and brokers of other people's crypto assets. And as some of you may know, Gibraltar is also looking to introduce a promotion regime for token sales, which will cover a gap that exists for those token sales, or ICOs as people sometimes refer to them, that don't represent securities under Gibraltar or European law. So I think it's, there are different ways in which you can encourage the crypto community to come to your jurisdiction and be a hub. And I'm interested in, perhaps I'll start by asking actually what the panelists' views are about Gibraltar's proposal for bringing in place a regulatory regime which requires utility tokens or non-security tokens to be subject to promotion rules. I don't know who would like to go first. Marina, would you like to?
No, I don't think I'm the best person
to. Jouko, would you like to take this on? What do you think about the idea of having a regime that provides some minimum standards when you're doing a sale of tokens that aren't securities?
Yeah, of course, I think it's awesome. But at the same time, I can see that many European governments are taking pretty much different type of approach. And I thought that I would be happy to tell a little bit about that and so on during this talk. So, but yeah, I don't know too much about the situation here or in Malta or in some other interesting places. Right now I'm working for the government, but I'm also sevenfold startup entrepreneur, and I have been, the last company I founded was in Estonia, and that was an Ethereum cryptocurrency company. So it's interesting, but the point I'm going to try to make here is that governments participate in markets in many ways. It's not only regulation. It's you can do a lot of things to keep certain type of companies in your country and so on. So that will be my approach more.
Would you mind saying what do you think Finland is doing well then in terms of encouraging? Because you've got a lot of if it's not too disrespectful, it definitely punches at its weight, if not above its weight, in terms of the the innovation in fintech. So what's happening there to try and stop a brain drain to other jurisdictions?
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, there's no one best place in the world. Free people move, free companies move, and the great companies are transnational companies. They build functions in different places around the globe. Or, as we heard this morning, very interesting, they build kind of loose partnership structures with companies in Asia and so on. So if you study how big old transnational companies work and what are the key things that they do right, there's a lot of things to learn, and especially if you look at the young crypto startups.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and in Finland, I think we are focusing now in creating the digital environment. In one of the panels, Pavel said that he would like to focus on automation and that type of things. I think as we go a couple of years, these smart contracts start to work as they should, and we are building networks where value flows. It's not about where are you incorporated, but they are networks where value flows, and you need to snap your part of that value from that flow, and that's not only about jurisdiction. It's about the digital infrastructure. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think I would share some of my thoughts. I think any government, when they decide something, they're sending a message, right? So if they welcome innovation, they're gonna have the rules being lax. They say, no, why don't we just try it? You can play in a sandbox, you can do this. And it sends a message they welcome some innovation to the country. So when you choose a jurisdiction, is really where you want to be, right? Instead of just saying that, oh, I want to go to a low-tax jurisdiction. It shouldn't be the determination. It should be where I want to establish my business. Where does it make sense? Does the tax make sense? Do I set up my team in that jurisdiction? Does it cover the human resource? I can source talent effectively. Those kind of things should be the top priority, and then you want to see the message that government trying to send. We see a lot of government kind of be reactive, and the people say, you know when this regulation is going to come, and government say, we don't know. And some governments say, you know what, we'll come up, we'll have some guidance. So you can see how proactive those governments are, and then you decide. We should be educated enough to make the judgment ourselves. Which jurisdiction do we want to operate ourselves in? That will be a better approach for entrepreneurs, especially in the crypto space.
I think I've often seen with clients that they may have heard of a jurisdiction because of tax, but as you said, it's a pretty cosmetic analysis, particularly in a space as complicated or complex from a regulatory perspective as DLT and blockchain. Is it perhaps worth maybe exploring where's Singapore at the moment? What's going on there, and how do you how is the government dealing with that interaction and relationship with this new sector?
Yeah, in Singapore, actually, there are few guidance from the regulatory body. It's the MAS, Monetary Authority of Singapore. They have a digital asset guidance. In the paper, actually, it says they welcome this type of innovation. So I think the government is very friendly. So that's why I think a lot of crypto companies, ICO companies, they set up companies in Singapore because they feel that this jurisdiction will give them protection. And then because it's also a financial center, you look at the financial centers in the world is in New York, London, Singapore, Hong Kong. These are the top ones. In Singapore, it seems to be the most friendly. But there's no regulation comes out yet. Right now, there's some consultation period. So we've been talking to some law firms. They're in the regulatory roundtable discussion on some of the regulation on exchange and ICOs. Nothing has come out yet, but government has been quite friendly. Every year they have this big fintech festival. They welcome all kinds of innovation because I think the country also sending a message that we want to grow. We want to be innovative. We want to be embracing all those game-changing technologies that will make the country look good. So from that basis, you see a lot of people moving to Singapore.
Marina, is it worth, do you think that having a jurisdiction, a license in a jurisdiction, as long as it's a good jurisdiction, do you think it adds value to a proposition for investors, for people in the space, rather than saying that they are operating by informal agreement in that jurisdiction, or a lack of enforcement activity, you may even say. How important do you think it is to be regulated and licensed in terms of your value proposition as a crypto operator?
I think it is quite important, and we have seen reputation of Gibraltar and other European jurisdictions becoming kind of more prominent from that regard. But I think the other important point to remember is you are not really limited by just where you're based. Where you sell into is another critical aspect of that. And that's why it's a lot more, I would say, complex legal work required over the course of you doing an ICO, right? We have seen regulators becoming more and more prominent around their thinking, specifically how to regulate ICOs. How do securities laws apply in that regard? So I would say it is quite a complex situation that ICO issuers are effectively in, and generally very clear legislation in the jurisdiction of issuance, and the reputation of that jurisdiction is important, but that's just part of the puzzle.
I think in Gibraltar, as people may be aware, the online gaming experience here has been very useful for professionals here, and also the government and others, to have to deal with those complex issues of territoriality, of which laws apply, and to what extent they apply based on not just principles but activity. And I think that's an area, as a lawyer, it's always interesting to advise clients, because they want to do a token sale from, say, a Gibraltar company, and then they ask you as if you're going to be able to give them the answer. So can I have contributors from Japan, like South Korea, America, and they just reel off a list as if you're going to be able to say, yes, it's binary, you can or you can't. And you have to explain to them, actually, there are lots of regulated companies in existing financial services and gambling space who quite frankly have to take a regulatory risk approach, not dissimilar to a risk-based approach to AML. It's not always a question of you can just whitelist the world and blacklist the world. There's a risk appetite issue for companies, isn't there, in the process by which you understand the risks you're taking when there's not regulatory certainty. I think it requires a degree of sophistication, I think, in the operators to navigate that.
And then, not least, that you have to then categorize: is it a security, is it a utility token, or is it now a virtual financial asset? So there's even more questions.
Yeah, and in which country are we talking?
Yeah, it could be, well, any of them. Obviously, I'm going to have a chat about Malta.
So what's your experience, Anna, in terms of what are clients looking for? When the question being, where should I set up, perhaps to do a token sale? What are the driving issues you hear?
Let's see. So what you've mentioned as to whereabouts they could be, tax regimes, talent pool, depending if they're going to want to locate, businesses there. Are they going to want to put developers in there, or exec level? Where do they want their business to be based, and what's that particular function going to service? Marketing. It's a really broad church, as we're all aware.
Banking. That's the one that comes up.
Of course,
Banking nearly every time.
Ever-pressing.
In fact, it's usually the second question after asking what Gibraltar's like for token sales. It's, will I be able to get bank support? And luckily we do have providers here in the audience, I think, as well, who are willing to look on a case-by-case basis. But we heard a panelist before say that that still remains one of the key issues in this space, doesn't it? In terms of maybe just sticking on that briefly, because it's such a key issue, do you mind going through your experience in jurisdictions that you understand in terms of banking support? So. Yeah,
so banking support, I've been lucky enough to run many of our token sale clients out of Gibraltar. There's a fantastic infrastructure here. We have got a banking solution here, but that can come with certain issues depending on where clients are sending the money from and any corresponding banks. Malta as well is being fantastic so far in terms of banking solution.
Yeah, in Finland, the major banks are working hard with the AML and KYC things to get their own best practices in order, and they already have. They work with in the blockchain base already. They have built some kind of corporate ID KYC systems in there, and I think they will be in production and live later this year. When I established my last company, Nordledger, I went to Estonia because we kind of knew that you can go there and there's this one bank that is crypto friendly, and so that was the reason And I also wanted to test the e-resident thing, which they were so...
How did it go? The resident thing?
Wow, it went smoothly. I need to say that, but I was pretty early. It was December 2015, so I was the e-resident in January 2016, and then a little bit later the company was incorporated there. So I think there's a difference when I'm listening what you guys are talking. There is a kind of startup entrepreneur discourse here, which is pretty straightforward. We just go there, test, does it work, and so on. But then there is this meta discourse of lawyers and all kind of people who are making things difficult. So we just try, we fail, or that works, and then we go on, and that's it.
I'm prepared now for the next time we're on a panel, Jouko. I'm going to be forewarned as forearmed. You're right, though. I mean, entrepreneurs just want to do it. Whatever it is that they want to do, they want to do it, and often they feel like you're the business prevention, officer, because you're trying to explain to them that there are, going back to the point about risk. It's not to not take risk, because who the hell succeeds without taking any risk? It's making sure they understand the risk. So I think good lawyers aren't there to tell you not to do something. They're to tell you, do you understand what you're doing, and whether you might go to jail doing it that way, or whether you may just, you may have chosen the wrong jurisdiction, or you might not want to do a roadshow in that country. It's a spectrum, isn't it?
Yeah, there is.
It needs to be much more complex.
Yeah, of course, I need to say that these TokenMarket people, they have their tech team in Finland, and Mikko and Ransu are both Finnish, and there was a reason why they didn't incorporate their company there, and they came to Gibraltar, of course, and I big respect and for them for finding this type of emerging great platform.
Yeah, so it comes back to the entrepreneur right now. There's so much demand for entrepreneurs to really do your homework, right? Yeah. So trial and error, sometimes it's a way to learn, but if you can be smart about it, ask questions ahead of time, so you can save a lot of energy and then time. In terms of banking, I think, I spent 10 years in the bank. The bank is not the most efficient entity in the world, but they don't want to take risk, right? So unless the government says, we're okay with crypto, and the bank will not open a bank account for you. Even so, like for example, in China, you won't get bank account, but in Japan, yes, you can get bank accounts. Because government already said, okay, Bitcoin is a means of payment. You can set up exchanges as long as you get licenses, those kind of things. So that would actually help you to make decision where you want to locate your business.
What about Singapore, the banking there? What's the level of interest in supporting crypto businesses?
Okay, so this is I'll share my own experience. The bank usually very risk averse because they don't want to lose their banking license. They don't know if the crypto company has sufficient KYC, AML policies in place. So you really have to develop a relationship with the banks. Some banks are more accommodative. Some banks are not. Really, the thing is, the bank have to do their own KYC. They have to convince themselves and say, okay, this is a safe company. We want to open an account for you. Usually, the bank has to get to that comfort level. It needs a lot of relationship building. If you're a blockchain company that only building infrastructure, so you're encouraging developers, those kind of things, you're likely to get a bank account other than exchange that taking fiat, buying crypto. You have thousands of transactions per day. It's very hard for the banks to put in manpower to say, oh, this is a safe account. I want to help you sustain crypto business. It's really a headache for them. Yeah. So you want to make sure that the banks are your partner by making their jobs easy, because they do have a huge compliance guidelines to follow. And if they don't follow, they get audited, they lose their bank license. They won't do it for you, right? So that's the reality.
And where do you see the most, maybe from an overview perspective, where do you see as being the most friendly crypto hubs at the moment? Or the areas, places where the most interesting activity is going on in the world?
Yeah, I think the ones that we already named, like Gibraltar or Malta or Singapore, are probably we see as the most friendly. Actually, I'm seeing much better signals from US these days, right? Even though SEC is probably the most kind of stringent regulator globally, but just a couple of weeks ago, we have seen the regulator effectively commenting that an asset that starts as a security does not necessarily continue being a security throughout its life, which again is a very positive development. So, it's good to see regulators being aware of that space and still not wanting to say to kill innovation and to kind of retain that balance.
But I think it was it David Drake before talking about how there seems to be a change going on in the US, at least in some ways, a softening perhaps of the more recent position of the chairman of the SEC. In my experience advising clients, when the US issue comes up, obviously we're not, I'm not capable at the moment of giving US legal advice, so we give people an overview. And most often I'd say people after the overview say, well, fine, forget it, the US is just too complicated and the risks outweigh the rewards. So unless they've already got investors or pre-sale, investors lined up where they can look at the accredited route, by and large, and it's only my narrow experience, they've tended to say, well, it's simpler to leave it. But you've been involved in investments or token sales where there's been a strong US element. What's been your experience in terms of how to do token sales to the US market, and how's that changing?
Well, it is, to be honest, just traditional securities offering a private placement, right? Regardless of what is it that you're issuing. Are you issuing a security token, or what will ultimately become a true utility token? You still comply with securities laws and you use appropriate exemptions, again, that David referred to, that appeared as a result of the Jobs Act. It is still, unfortunately, comes with, I would say, more significant restrictions on the jurisdictions you can sell into. Lockups as well, say for US investors, and I would say more onerous compliance in terms of accredited investor checks and some of the, say, KYC and AML elements. Having said that, for issuers based out of the US, they still do kind of bear a lot more risks to do with the US side. So even if they incorporate offshore, I think it's a very prudent approach to just comply with securities laws, given there are those exemptions in place that are helpful to issuers.
Yeah, I think the Americans' long arm means that most people don't try and get into a dispute of applicability of local law.
Well, when you look into the Caymans or Puerto Rico that are really, trying to make themselves a crypto blockchain hub again, it's risky. So we do advise our clients that it could be risky, as you say. There's a long arm unless you treat it as a security on private pre-sale. You could run into big trouble.
I think I mentioned before to you, but we've had clients often come to us, and they want to do what's clearly a security, a tokenized security. And so far, I'd say in the last year, when we've talked through what that might look like from a European perspective, it's remarkably few people are still interested in doing a tokenized security at the end of it. And I understand why, because you start telling them, well, first of all, we have to work out which financial services regime it falls into, and it may fall into 2 or 3, depending on which player we're talking about in the space, because we have MiFID and AFMD and prospectus regime. But there's a sense that tokenized securities is the next wave, that people want to really push. Is that something you're seeing? And I don't mean just because in America the definition of a security is wider, but are you seeing a lot more interest now for people to find jurisdictions where they can offer a token which gives people, equity rights or, synthetic equity interests?
I think, yes, there are 2 aspects of that. One, the one that you just mentioned, right, that still issuing a security is if we talk about Europe, it is a lot more burdensome than a utility token, the way it can be structured. However, I think, and maybe that's also the reflection of the market that we are in, that is not as, say, bullish as it has been maybe early this year. So investors are a lot more conservative and diligent on the token models. And in many cases, say, token doesn't actually make sense. Decentralization doesn't make sense. Maybe you don't even need blockchain, right? And those were the companies that perhaps have done ICOs maybe end of last year or early this year, that maybe that they would probably not were able to do a deal this time, right? Just because, again, there is more and more awareness and more focus on token economics. But for those issuers, a security token may make sense, right? Something that has much more clear returns perspective, much more easily understandable by, say, more traditional investors, right? How to value that? Where does the value come from in that token? So from that perspective, definitely, I see more interest to those instruments, but compliance, though, is a little bit burdensome.
Anyone else got comments on the perhaps the next wave of tokenized securities?
Yeah, the Bank of Finland had a seminar 2 weeks ago about these token types, and there were the National Supervisory Authority was there, and Bank of Finland, the Ministry of Finance, and all the major banks. And I think that what I got there was that they saw the situation, they saw that the existing legislation is enough, and we do not need to do anything proactively, and they already have some, requests in and so on. So I think it's starting, but none of them have just in Finland. There are no existing examples yet.
We've got there's an example. One of the areas I've looked at that is very interesting is the use of the prospectus regime in Europe. Because it has good passporting rights, unlike the fund regime. And we've seen some direct-to-market offers of shares by people like Crowdcube, one of the crowdfunding platforms. And so I think that's an area where we'll start to see, and we're already getting interest from people of, well, why don't we do a prospectus offering, which is tokenized? I mean, interestingly, what you need if you're doing a non-listed offer like that, because the prospectus regime applies to securities, transferable securities that are listed on an exchange, or more rarely offered directly to the public, and people have not really used the directly to the public route, but they're starting to in Europe, and I think you could, that's an area where we could get some high impact offers, and we just need a couple to get for people to see that there is a way of doing it where it doesn't cost 5 million to do that kind of offer. And it would be compliant from a European legal perspective. But what you need if you're doing a direct offer to the public is the regulatory body where your home base is to sign off or approve it. And so again, you come back to that jurisdictional point of not only, will the regime work for me to do a tokenized share in effect, but will the regulator in any meaningful time walk through the process with me, so that I know within 6, 12, 18 months I'm going to be able to do this signed-off prospectus? Because if I won't get that level of comfort, who's going to wait 3 years to have continuous conversations? So I think for the next stage of if tokenized securities is going to be a big thing, jurisdictions in Europe and elsewhere that are willing to have conversations and push the timelines to make it happen are going to do really well.
Peter, I think we're running out of time, I'm afraid.
Oh, questions to the audience?
No, I'm afraid we're going to have to skip the questions because we're running a bit late.
I was only on the first bit of the agenda as well. I've got three other bits.
We can carry on in a cupboard.
Sorry, but thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.